Welcome back to another episode of the Middlegame Series. In case if you're new here, my name is Ujjwal, I'm having a FIDE rating of 1814 and I've been playing chess for nearly a decade. In today's video, we are going to talk about something every player struggle with: how to play the middle game in chess. You have finished your opening, your pieces are developed, and now what next? That's the question we'll answer today. I'll walk you through the key principles, strategic ideas, and thinking patterns that strong players use to find plans in the middle game. Whether it's improving your worst piece, creating pawn breaks, or spotting weaknesses in your opponent's position. So if you have ever reached a good opening position but didn't know how to continue, this video is for you. So I hope that this video finds you well. Are you ready to improve your middle game? Let's begin. Okay, so we have this position on the board. It's a normal position where both the sides are having equal material and both the sides are planning to develop the pieces. It's currently black to move and black just castled on the king side. And here, white castled on the queen side. So first, in the middle game, you need to assess the position once you have developed all your pieces. You need to understand your opponent's weaknesses and your own weaknesses and understand your opponent's strength and your own strength. So first of all, if I talk about the weaknesses of my opponent, currently the opponent is not really having any weakness. The only difference that we both guys are having here is black's king is on the king side, whereas white's king is on the queen side. That's the only difference. Second thing, we need to understand our strength. Now generally the strength can be assessed by looking at the pawn structure. So starting from extremely scratch, this is known as the queen side and this is known as the king side. So white is having 4 pawns on the king side. Black is having 3 pawns on the king side. So I'm having majority pawns on the king side. Whereas black is having 4 pawns on the queen side and I'm having 3 pawns on the queen side. So technically, black is aiming to play on the queen side by pushing his pawns on the queen side, and my idea as I'm playing with the white pieces is to play on the queen side by pushing these pawns on the king side and launch an attack to the black king. So this is how you assess the position and evaluate. The most important part is where you need to play, on which side you need to play, and how you need to play, how you need to generate an attack. So once white castle on the long side, we have understood where we need to play. We need to play on the king side, whereas black is aiming to play on the queen side, attacking our king. So it's black to play, and for example, if black takes the knight on c3, after bishop cross c3, now many of the beginners must be wondering that black is just winning a pawn on e4 after queen cross e4, as I can't take because after knight takes, black would be a pawn up. That's true, but I won't really capture the queen, but instead I will play the move like queen g3. And after queen g3, indeed white is a pawn down, but you need to also look at the material. You need to understand the power of the pieces. Currently white is having the bishop pair, and bishop is always extra powerful when the position is opened up. As you can see, there is no pawn in the center, so the bishop on c3 is a very strong piece. My plan is to currently capture the knight as the g pawn is simply pinned. So after queen g3, for example, if black plays knight e8 going back with the knight, also defending the pawn on g7, I can simply play bishop d3, developing all my pieces, and indeed white is a pawn down, but you can see both the bishops on d3 and c3 are lined up, aiming at the king, and it's already very hard to play with the black pieces. My idea is to get the h rook to e1, sacrifice the rook for the knight, and the moment black recaptures it, queen g7 is simply a mate, the game is over. So you see, it's not always that you need to judge the material. In many of the cases when you are doing the opposite side castling, as we have this particular case, it is very common for top players to understand that you can even sacrifice 3 pawns. All the 3 pawns on the king side for free, just to open up the file to launch an attack to the black king. So in the game we had d6 by black. The idea is very common. So basically after d6, black is first of all opening up the light square bishop. And the most important part here is after f4, the queen is attacked, the queen has to go back, and now white can't play e5 because there is a pawn on d6. That's the most important part. And after queen e7, now comes the most important decision that you need to make. How are you going to continue the attack? You need to make a plan now. How are you going to put your pieces? Which squares are the best for your pieces? So I want you to pause this video and try to find a good plan. How are you going to arrange your pieces at the most logical squares? And how are you going to generate the attack? Okay, so after queen e7, let's try to break it down logically. I want my bishop on f1 to be on d3. Why? Because once the bishop reaches on d3, the bishop would be a very strong piece. The moment I get the e5 break, the bishop would be very strong on d3, attacking the king. But currently I'm having my own queen on d3. And I can't really move my queen from d3 because the moment I move my queen to d3, the e4 pawn is simply collapsing. So in this position, the most logical move and the best move here is to play the move rook e1. I'm simply protecting the e4 pawn with the rook. And second here is my rook is on d1 currently on the queen side. I'm simply playing on the king side. So it's make so much sense to get my rook to play on the king side. And after rook e1, I'm also having one more idea to push the pawn to e5, attacking the knight, as my rook is simply opened up, attacking the queen. And now I'm fully prepared to move my queen from d3, get the bishop to d3, and arrange my pieces and launch an attack to the black king. Black plays rook e8. White plays queen g3. As I said, now queen g3 is a fantastic square for the queen, simply aiming at the g7 pawn and also the king. And now black plays c6. Now another logical way to continue here is bishop d7. Bishop d7 makes a lot of sense. You are simply trying to develop all your pieces. After bishop d7, black's idea is to simply push the pawns on the queen side. And another idea is generally to put the bishop on c6 because it covers the d5 square, which is a very soft square in black's camp. And maybe the knight can jump on d5 in the future. So putting the bishop on c6 is also a very good idea, and also putting some pressure on the pawn on e4. But black played the move c6, and c6 is also absolutely fine move and one of the best move. Because c6 is a move which is generally, these are the best moves and these are the logical ideas when you are having such positions. Because if you are a good player, and many professional players already know the middle game ideas because they have already seen so much games that they know the ideas, they know the setups. So c6 is a very common idea because the idea is generally to push the pawn on the queen side. By a5, b5, as the pawn is on c6, which defends the b5 pawn, and the pawn is on c6, which also covers the d5 square at the same time. So after c6, white plays bishop d3, getting all the pieces into the game. Now the bishop is also nicely developed, aiming at the h7 pawn. Black plays the move knight to d7. Now knight d7 is a very logical move because white is maybe thinking to play the move e5, opening up the bishop and also attacking the knight on f6. So black played knight to d7. Now what's the idea? After knight d7, black wants to play the move knight f8, because knight f8 would be a very passive piece. But at the same time, there is a saying, the knight on f8 is a very good defender to protect the black king. Because you see, it covers the h7 and it can always hop on to g6. So if you want to mate the black king and you need to defend your mate, you can just put your knight to f8, which is a great defender. And also at the same time, it's also a prophylaxis move. You have already taken a step towards the move e5 as you have already moved the knight to d7. After knight d7, we have the move a3, the bishop goes back, and now we have the move rook h to f1. And after rook h f1, white has gotten all his pieces into the game, and now white is absolutely ready to launch an attack on the black king. And now black plays bishop to c7. Now again, a question here is, why did black play the move bishop c7, and why black is not really pushing up the pawns on the queen side? So currently the bishop is on a5, and as you can see, it is just staring down the knight and the bishop, but it's not really doing much. It's sort of a useless piece. So, and if I want to launch an attack, if I'm playing with the black pieces, I want to launch an attack on the queen side. I can't really push my a pawn because the bishop is in between. So bishop c7 is a very logical move because now it opens up the a pawn and the b pawn, and now I can start rolling down the pawns on the queen side. And after bishop c7, it also is in the same diagonal as the queen, so I can maybe push d5, attack the queen, maybe put some pressure on the queen, which makes so much sense. And now after bishop c7 is the main question. Now, why does now I won't really give you any hint. I just wanted to pause the video and try to understand the position. And once you have a good plan, how are you going to attack the black king? You can resume the video. Okay, so now there are majorly two pawn pushes to attack the black king. There is f5, which is the main move, and that's exactly what happened in the game, opening up the dark square bishop. And also the point here is just to push the f pawn so that I can open up my rook and the bishop, which makes so much sense. Another pawn push is e5, pushing up the e pawn. Once again, the same idea, opening up the e rook and also opening up the d diagonal for the bishop. Now, first starting with the e pawn, e5. So the basic point here is I would likely to prefer the move f5 much more rather than e5. Let's understand why. After e5, black takes on e5, black have to take on e5. And now, at the place of capturing the pawn, which looks very obvious, black can simply capture the pawn on e5 with the bishop. And once I go back with the queen, now black can play the move f6. And you see what happens when I played the move e5. When I played the move e5, I'm trying to open up the center. And the moment I open up the center, black has sort of got all his pieces to defend the black king. But if I keep the position close with the move of f5, you see there is no good way for black to open up the position. So black's pieces would be a bit more restricted on the queen side. Black won't be getting any time to get the pieces into play to defend the black king. That's the whole thing. So the main move here is after e5 takes. White is not really going to take the pawn, but instead getting all the pieces into the game with knight e4, allowing black to capture another pawn. And after bishop f4, so basically after knight e4, white's idea is to get the move knight g5, attack, build an attack on the black king. Black takes the pawn, white takes the pawn, black takes the bishop, white takes the bishop back with the rook, with the idea of maybe getting the rook onto the g4, h4 and attacking the black king. And now my idea is to play the move knight f6 check and capturing the queen on the next move. So black is sort of forced to move the king, and the moment the black king move, now white can play the move rook f1 with the threat of playing the move rook f7. That's a complete win. And now black plays knight e5. For example, if black plays f6, just pushing the pawn to f6. Now I can even play the move queen h4, just attacking the pawn on h7, and black's once again pieces are all crammed up, not having enough time to get all the pieces into the game. The moment black plays king g8, it's already queen h7 check, sacrificing the queen, knight f6 check, the king have to move, let's say king h8, rook h4 is simply a checkmate. If king h6, rook h4 check, king over here, rook h5 is game over. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. So let's say if knight e5, now I can play knight d6, which is one of the main ideas when you're attacking. Sacrifices are one thing that you must always be aware of. You must always look out for when you are attacking your opponent's king. Knight d6 with the threat of simply attacking, capturing the pawn on f7 with the knight. You have to take the knight. Now comes rook f7. Now you move the king, it would be a mate. You have to take the rook now, but after queen d6 check, you can't take the queen because the knight is pinned and white is totally winning. Now that's one way to play. You can go for e5, but what I like more is f5. Restricting all black's pieces, not giving black a single chance to open up the position, just doing a one-sided attack. That's what every player loves to, giving no counterplay to your opponent. Now after f5, let's say black plays f6. In the game we had king h8, but let's say f6. f6 makes so much sense, not allowing white to push the pawn. And now black's idea is to put the knight on e5 and maybe trying to get back into the game. But the moment black plays f6, now you need to understand what are the weaknesses black has created by pushing up the pawn. After f6, now this particular diagonal from a2 to g8 is very weak. So white need to use it by playing the move bishop c4 check, forcing the king to h8. Let's say if black tries to complicate the matters a bit by playing the move d5, attacking the bishop and also attacking the queen. Now white can simply take the pawn on d5. It requires a bit of calculation, but it's simply winning. White takes on d5, black takes the queen. Now we push the pawn to d6, giving a check to the black king. Now let's say if black plays king h8, I can take the queen, takes. Now the bishop is hanging and I can simply make the queen. You can't stop the queen, and that's totally winning. So let's say if black plays a move like king f8. Now I can take the queen with a check, takes. I can take the bishop in the last, and I'm a piece up with a total winning position. So that's exactly what happens if black tries to push the pawn to d5. So black is that's why forced to play the move king h8, and that's exactly what happened in the game. Sorry, king h8 was not happened. At the place of f6 we had king h8, but okay, after king h8, now white can simply play the move queen h4. And now it's totally winning position for white. You can ask me what's the idea of white, how should white strike the final blow. White just wants to push the g pawn down the road, g4 g5, getting the e rook or maybe the f rook to the h file and simply checkmate the black king on h7. If black ever tries to push the g pawn, I can simply take it, opening up my f file. The king would be much weaker thanks to the bishop on c4, which covers every light squares available in the position, and that's totally winning position for white. So that's exactly what happens if black plays the move f6. Now let's say if black plays the move king h8, that's exactly what happened in the game. Now here's the chance. White made a brilliant way to attack the black king and checkmated the black king. You can try to pause the video and once again try to find the winning sequence, or let's say the winning way for white. Okay, so now there are two ways. Actually, the main move, like you can also play the move e5, which is absolutely fine, but the move I like, and that's exactly what happened in the game, is f6. White pushes the pawn to f6, sacrificing the pawn. Now black is having two ways to capture the pawn, with the pawn or with the knight. In the game we had the move gf6, but let's say what happens if knight f6. If knight f6, white pushes another pawn to e5. The whole idea is to just open up both the bishops. After e5, now the d3 bishop is also opened up to h7. You have to take the pawn, and now comes the critical move, which is bishop g5. Understanding the f file is opened up, putting the bishop on g5. Now it's just game over. Now most probably white can even sacrifice the rook for the knight, just to make the black king even weaker, get the queen to h4 and simply checkmate the black king on h7. Let's say black pushes the pawn to e4, attacking the bishop, and also the queen on g3, just queen h4. You can't take the bishop because the queen is hanging. I'm threatening to capture the knight with the rook, takes, and I win the queen. So black has to play the move bishop e5 just to defend the knight, and now I can simply take the pawn on e4 with the knight. You can't take the knight because the queen is hanging. I can simply take the knight on the next move and simply threaten a mate on h7, and black's completely losing. So that's exactly what happens if black takes the pawn on f6 with the knight. If black takes the pawn on f6 with the g pawn, now comes the move e5, and that's exactly what happened in the game, which is amazing. With the same idea of just the moment you took with the g pawn, now the king is much weaker, and after e5, now the bishop is also opened up. Both the bishops are opened up, both the rooks are opened up, and that's completely winning position for white. After e5, now black is having many ways to capture the e pawn, with the d pawn, with the f pawn, with the knight. First, starting with the knight. If black takes the pawn with the knight, I can simply take on h7, king h7, rook f4 with the idea of rook h4, and that's a mate. You see the whole idea? Sack the bishop and just a mate. Now, if black takes the pawn with the d pawn, once again the same idea with bishop h7, king h7, this time rook f5 or even rook e4 wins. With the same idea of rook h5, that's game over. If black takes the pawn with the f pawn, that's exactly what happened in the game. Still the same case, bishop cross h7. Once again, you can't take the bishop because rook e4 and rook h4 is game over. So after bishop h7 in the game, d5 was happened. After d5, white simply went back with the bishop, and now you can simply realize white is totally winning, as black's king is extremely weak. Black is a pawn up, but it doesn't matter. Black played the move f6 just to cover the h7 square. Now we have queen h4 check, the king move, and now you see we need to checkmate the black king. Now the bishop and queen are not really enough. We need to get all the pieces into the game. How can you do so? By doing a rook lift. Rook f3 or even rook e3 works with the threat of rook g3, which totally wins the game. Black tries to push the pawn to e4, trying to cover the g3 square. But now you see, when you're doing a one-side attack, sacrifices are one thing that you should always watch out for, because sacrifices are the fastest way to win the game. Knight cross e4. We sacrifice the knight for the pawn, and black takes it. Rook cross e4. You see, it doesn't really matter. We can sacrifice 1, 2 pieces, but black king is totally losing. The queen tried to move. Takes, check. The king moved, and now bishop h6 check. And it's not a check, it's a mate, and that's completely winning. And that's how white won. So you see, such a brilliant game played by white. It's all about middle game. Middle game is the main thing that you must understand. Once, you can ask me how to improve my middle game. Now, basically, the first way here is you need to watch the games of the top players. You need to understand. First, for example, if you play the Queen's Gambit, watch the games of Queen's Gambit particularly played by the top players. Understand the ideas. Like, for example, if you watch the games of top players in the Queen's Gambit, around 100 games, you would be seeing a set of ideas that are repeating itself. And once you got to know about these ideas, you can implement those ideas in your games, and eventually that's one of the main ways to improve your middle game. And second way here is keep practicing, and that's the key reason. Just play the game, analyze it, and that's how you can improve your middle game. So you see, you just need to understand. First, you need to, once you have developed all your pieces, your king is castled up, you need to understand your opponent's weakness, and you need to understand your own strength. You need to play on your strength and against your opponent's weaknesses. That's how you need to play the middle game, and you can improve your middle game. So I hope that this video was very helpful for you. If you learned something new today, make sure to like, share, and smash that subscribe button. I'm going to come up with more interesting videos like this. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.